Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar. I'm Allison DeFlorio, and I'm joined by one of my absolute favorite people and co-facilitator, Romaine Jones-Wise. How are you, Ro?
I am great. Good afternoon, everybody. Hope everybody's enjoying lunch. If that's your time zone. If not, hope you're enjoying breakfast. Let us know what time zone are you logging in from today?
Yeah. Hopefully, it's a time zone that's warmer than the one that we're in right now, as we were just talking about that. But we really do appreciate those of you who have been on webinars with us before and are returning. And for those of you who may be joining us for the first time, welcome. We're particularly interested in talking about today's topic, advancing disability justice by design. And before we get into our formal presentation, I always like to talk about the behind the scenes, how we got to this topic. And Ro, feel free to chime in, but
Sure.
Ro and I and our other consultants are regularly having conversations with our clients and with employers about accommodation requests and how can we're having this complaint or this has been voiced by our team. How do we go about doing this? And what we have found over these conversations is those employers who approach the subject with curiosity versus hesitation tend to realize and discover that many of the accommodation requests or the solutions are simple, they're affordable, and they actually can benefit more than just the individual who is requesting the accommodation. So I see Ro nodding her head there, and that's really the context for which this Ro designed this particular program. And we hope that you think about how you look at this as what action can I take in my organization to perhaps think about redesigning something that would make our workforce, that would make the workplace more accessible to everyone in the workforce. So, a couple of housekeeping tips here. This is being recorded, as always, so we will send a link out after the session. Please feel free to share it with anyone in your organization or someone that you think would benefit from this information, may find it interesting. Your questions are important, and we please put them in the chat. We will do our best to address as many of them as we do have, as we can get to. We'll also have our contact information on the last slide. So if you'd like to reach out, we're happy to do a complimentary consult. There may be something specific that you'd like to talk about that we're not going to be able to address today, but please do reach out to us. We're passionate about this subject, and we want to make sure you have the information you need to be successful. Other than that, I think we'll jump right in and do some formal intros. I know many of you may know us. For those of you who don't, I'm Allison DeFlorio, co-founder, managing partner of Exude Human Capital. I work with employers to help them with all things people. We provide fractional HR solutions on an ongoing basis or by project on a whole host of things throughout the entire employee experience. So everything from recruitment and onboarding to performance management, pay and benefits, to employee relations and everything in between. And I would like to turn it over to Ro to share a little bit about her background.
Good afternoon, everybody. I am Romaine KJ Wise, better known as Ro or Lettuce. I am a senior consultant with Exude Human Capital, and I work at the intersectionality of human resources, learning and development, inclusion and belonging. I am passionate about the work that I do. I enjoy partnering with our dynamic clients to find solutions that benefit everyone, the organizations, the employees. My tagline is I have a heart for people and a mind for business. So I think about both sides at all times. And I can now say I am a national facilitator of content and subject matter expertise across the country. So I am very excited to be here and have this conversation today.
And thank you, Ro, because I know you got back late last night from Minneapolis, where she was addressing a group of business leaders around attraction retention strategies in a challenging market. So we appreciate you doing this one with us today as well.
Yeah.
That said, let's kind of move into our content here, just to give you an idea of what we're going to be talking about. A lot of this is about shifting the mindset, thinking differently and shifting from individual accommodation to universal design. Also, how important it is to understand why the voices of people with lived disability experience improve organizational outcomes. And Ro has quite a few examples to share with you in that space. Also, recognizing and valuing diverse abilities and not managing limitations. It goes back to that. How do we think about this through the lens of curiosity and what we can do versus what somebody can't do? And identify innovative accessibility practices that go beyond legal compliance. So, I do want to say, while we will talk about accommodations, this session is broader than that,
Mhm.
and we recognize that many on this session may have particular um, requests around specific accommodations. Again, reach out to us. We're happy to talk about that, and we'll address some of the things to be mindful of when setting accommodation processes throughout today as well. Little bit of context, and I think this is interesting. 50% of accommodations cost nothing to the employer. And this is from both governmental resources and national survey data. The other thing that I find is really interesting, look around your office, and 1 in 4 US adults live with a disability. Many of those disabilities we don't see. But they do, and you may never know it. Um, and it's important to keep that in mind because we may make assumptions that no, nobody here has a disability. I don't see anything. But many people struggle every day with having to work a little bit harder just to be able to do what comes very naturally to someone else who may not have that same experience. And people with disabilities are 2 times more likely to be unemployed due to access. Again, some of the accommodations we're going to talk about, this universal design, are simple fixes to workplace processes that just make it more accessible for someone to do their job. So, with that, Ro, I'd love to hear from you and share with our group kind of how you look at disability.
Yeah, a lot of times I start this conversation with the premise that this is not a deficit. Disability is not a deficit in any way, shape, or form. It's a design challenge. It's how we think about this. And the challenge has become that the systems we create often disable individuals because we're emphasizing an environment and attitudes that are coming from more of an ableist mindset without taking into account everyone's experience. So by default, we're setting up people to have to ask for things that if we reimagine how we design them from the start, wouldn't be necessary because it would create support for everyone that's involved. And a lot of times I get a lot of pushback where we're saying, well, why should I have to do this if only one person needs an accommodation? Because if one person needs it, there's a chance that somebody else could also use it. They're just not saying anything. So it's really about being inclusive to the point that we are not looking to be a charity case or just to be compliant, but we're looking to be equitable and give justice to everyone in our workspaces. So it's identifying that this is not a deficit. It's just reimagining how we design things from the start, policies, procedures, office setup. So
And we know that there's a compliance component to this. I think we alluded to that. We all know that you've probably in your organizations dealt with the individual accommodation. But Ro, I love when you always say, compliance, it's not the goal, it's the floor. We have to have good processes. Can you talk a little bit about that?
yeah, if we're just complying with ADA and Department of Labor, we're doing the bare minimum. And nobody wants to work in a place where the bare minimum is the standard. We want to be able to fully engage employees so that they feel that they can come safely and be themselves. So looking beyond compliance is huge because it creates a space for us not to be reactive. It's not this case by case basis where we're trying to see, well, did I set a precedent previously, or how is this going to impact other people? And we're always trying to catch up. When we design it from the start, we're proactively looking at how this is going to involve all of the visible and invisible disabilities that are in the workplace.
Great, great. Talk to us a little bit about ableism.
It gets a bad reputation. Ableism sometimes is now like a bad word, but I I think it's a mindset and it's the hidden default in how we lean into things. I'll take it very granularly. Think about the person who's left-handed,
That
an
would be
officer,
me, by the way.
right? So the challenges that come with being left-handed, because most of our offices and office products are designed with right-handed tendencies. And it shows up in how the equipment and all that we use, but ableism translates more into how we perceive things. Sometimes we will equate speed for competency. The faster the work, the better someone is. That's not necessarily always true. The fact that someone puts in a 10-hour days means that they're more committed to the job than the person who can get it done in 6. That's not fair. Everybody's outcomes are the same, but some people may have to work a little bit longer, or desire to work longer. Speaking up fast means that you're fully engaged. When people like myself, take time to process because we process information a little differently, may have great ideas, but they may get overlooked because we're responding to the person who speaks the fastest and not giving space for people who need the additional time for thought and reflection. So when we think about ableism, it's not just that, our doorways aren't wide enough, or we need to have accessible bathrooms and all of the things that we automatically think about. But I really want us to kind of take a look at how we're perceiving work from an ableist mindset. If I work faster, that means I'm more competent. If I work longer, that means I'm more committed. Just kind of reimagining how we think about it, because it's not always just about the employee. Sometimes it's about the systems that we have in place and how we manage performance and expectations.
I think, when I hear that speaking up fast, I think that one, all of you that are listening today, pay attention to that in your meetings. And, I know we'll talk about this, but so many meetings are not set up to allow time for people to process information. And you could be unintentionally excluding voices that have that golden nugget of information that could help solve for something, right? Beyond what we're just talking about here.
True.
This
Oh,
has to be one of my favorite examples that you have shared.
this by far, and I found this picture online. It's called the curb cut effect. You can see from the image that the cutout in the curb originally designed to make sure curbs and sidewalks were wheelchair accessible for individuals with disabilities. However, when you look at this picture, the benefits impact everybody else around them. You have a person with a stroller. You have a person on a bike. You have a person with a hand truck. You may have a person that has a mobility issue that is not necessarily in a wheelchair, but stepping up on a curb can prove to be a challenge. So, this curb cut effect is how we can design something for the benefit of one group that totally impacts and benefits everyone universally. It's making sure everyone has the access necessary. So stepping up on the curb for a person in a wheelchair, yes, you have to redesign so that there's the slope, but think about all of the other people that it impacts. How does this show up in the workplace, you're asking? Universal design shows up by way of things like flexible work hours. Flexible work hours, meaning that there's a core set of hours and then employees are given autonomy to work what works best for them, is fully supportive of people who are caregivers, who may have chronic medical conditions that require treatment for certain hours in the day, that are high performers who thrive on that adrenaline of constantly working and pursuing meeting deliverables and deadlines. It also creates a
Whoop, sorry
space.
about that.
That's okay. It also creates a space for people who just work asynchronously. I am one of those people. I do my best work between like 10 p.m. and 2 a.m. and I can knock out a project because I'm less distracted. But I make sure I don't schedule my emails until 8 a.m. the following morning so they're not disruptive for other people. Just a little nugget there. But even think about sessions like this, recording meetings and captions. It supports people that may have a hearing impairment. It may support individuals like myself who are neurodivergent. And then it also speaks to all of the time zone differences. If you have team members that are in different time zones or you have a global team, it makes things a lot more manageable. Clear agenda and written follow-ups. By far, one of my favorites. It supports cognitive accessibility and productivity. If I know what I'm going into a meeting for, I can better prepare so I
Mhm.
can better contribute. Universal design, offering an agenda before a meeting costs us nothing, but it allows people to be fully prepared to know what the desired outcome for the time use, they can come and contribute to the conversation and feel like it's a good use of time compared to some of us who have, sat in meetings and wondered why that wasn't an email previously. So, the curb cut effect is solutions created for persons with disabilities, but it improves access for everyone. That's the short and sweet of it.
Yeah, you just made me think of just a very real example of this. A beach that I go to it had a request from people who use wheelchairs to add the mats to be able to access the beach a little bit farther, so it would be easier for them to get from the beginning of the beach at least down to where the heavier sand is.
Mhm.
And so they piloted a program on a couple of beach access points with these mats. Well, it became so popular because people with young families that are in the wheelchairs, and then everybody else who just carries, their entire house to the beach, and with those huge carts,
Mhm.
so many people, they actually expanded it to have that same type of setup on virtually every access point along their beach corridors instead of just the pilot 3 or 4 places that they had originally started. Again, it's universal design. They unintended impact, positive impact for many other users. So we have to think differently.
Kind of think differently.
Yeah.
So the nothing about us without us. This is making sure we include individuals who have lived experience with disabilities in the conversations. Typically, they're consulted after something has happened, or even not at all. So we want to make sure that they are part of the conversations, the decisions, the insight, the thought partnership. And, we typically ask individuals to educate others free of charge. Like it's their due service to educate us about their lived experience and things like that. I don't highly recommend that. I think if we're going to be allies to individuals with lived experiences with disabilities, that we should be doing that work ourselves. We should take some of that initiative to learn and ask and lead with curiosity. It's okay to ask questions, but we can't rely solely on individuals to inform us of what we need to do to better support them. Sometimes we have to take kind of ownership. When we think about centering this and what this looks like, it's involving individuals with disabilities in policy design, in technology selection, and workspace planning. Because if we're thinking about how we work, we're only looking at the way our limitations may impact us. Whereas if we're taking in different voices and different perspectives, we're going to get a broader scope and be able to design things that are more impactful and accessible for everybody involved.
And that to me is just a good business practice, right? So whether you're doing it around design of something, I mean, think about just design of a new product, design of anything. You
Mhm.
want to have the voices that can contribute to that. And how do you design something for someone who's not there? So I think that's so key and critical.
Now, I said a bad word a moment ago, and I will own it, and I ask that you pardon. I talked about limitations. And sometimes limitations are the thought process that we lean into. And I want to challenge us all to look beyond limitations and to see people's strengths. There is value added for every employee that works in our organization that may have a difference, be it a limb difference, be it a cognitive difference, a physical difference. There's still strength that they bring to the teams. And then when we can take the time to recognize that, we can definitely have greater impact in the work that we do because it changes our mindset. I personally will share a story. Um, Before his passing, my husband was in a mobility scooter. He was an amputee, and we had to kind of mobilize in a scooter. And it wasn't until the use of the scooter that I would research places prior to us going because I didn't want him to have a embarrassing experience because there were times we had gotten to places and there was an egress that he couldn't cross over a threshold, or the seating wasn't appropriate for the scooter and we had to kind of sit off to the side and he felt isolated. So it really changed how I view both places of business and travel. Those were the two that were major impacts. And that's what started this conversation in my head is how are we leaning into our workforce, our workplaces to really think about everyone who's involved. Case in point, I'm a fluffy person. I'll call it fluffy for lack of a better phrase. Sometimes I used to be concerned going into certain office buildings in chairs that were very narrow because I'm hippie and you want to sit down and want to be comfortable and you don't want to have to squiggle and worm and then you're concerned, is this chair going to be able to hold my weight capacity? If you're somebody who's 150 pounds, that is probably something that has never crossed your mind. But if you're someone who's over 250, it's something that you think about that not everybody would even consider. So just things like that. But there's a strength that I know that I personally bring to a team. And I know there's strength that other people bring to the team when we just look beyond their limitations. So I encourage everybody on this call, everybody watching this replay to shift the mindset from, well, this person is limited in doing to how does this person add value? What is the superpower that they bring? How are they enhancing the team? Because there is something that everybody offers. We just have to be able to tap into that strength.
And I think that's a great leadership tip in general too. Just if you're thinking about your team and everyone at times has frustrations at certain point, but when you go into a conversation, think about pre going to that conversation, say, these are the two things this person does incredibly well. This person is so good at this. Changes your mindset, frames your mindset for going in to have a conversation, even if it's a difficult conversation.
Correct. Agreed. Agreed. Here's some ways to help you shift that narrative. It's language. And a lot of times we avoid some of these conversations because we're not sure what to say. So if we shift the narrative, we'll stop asking what can't this person do, and then start asking what conditions help this person to do their best work. Think about how supportive that is to a person with a invisible or visible disability. What conditions are going to help you do your best work? Oh my goodness, it's so supportive. But then recognizing that there are strengths that come with some of these challenges. Individuals who may be on the autism spectrum have a keen ability for recognizing patterns. They have deep focus and they think so creatively and think outside of the box and will help find solutions to problems in ways that most, typical, neurotypical people may think. People with chronic medical or chronic illnesses have a great use for efficiency and prioritization, understanding that their work days may fluctuate. My husband was on dialysis, and I knew on dialysis days that he would require more care from me. So I was able to prioritize work on non-treatment days to get more things accomplished so that I had the flexibility to be supportive to him and work during the course of the day. But there's an adaptability that comes with that. If you think about some of your employees that may be going through cancer treatments right now or diabetes management, there are days when they know they're not going to feel their best, so they can reprioritize work to still meet the deliverables, meet the outcomes. But because you've established universal design and flexible work hours, they're not penalized because they're not at their workstation from 9 a.m. to 5 p.m.
You know,
So
you just made me think of something that we're seeing quite a bit now, and I've been hearing people just in conversation talking about how it disrupts their thought process, and that is post-pandemic when a lot of offices went remote. Everybody went remote for a while and they started bringing people back. They downsized their office space and they went to that hoteling concept where you don't have a dedicated space or you have to book a space, but it may not always be the same space. And I was talking with some young people recently and they were saying how how frustrating it is to not have your own space every time you go in. I just thought that was an interesting observation. And I don't know if you have had any feedback from clients about that or have if they've had feedback from employees finding that disruptive to their ability to do work.
I had one client that did the hoteling model, and they got feedback from employees that they didn't feel like the space was their own, so they never felt fully comfortable. So when they got into deep thought, it was always a challenge of trying to help refocus. Some of us refocus by looking at personal items. It could be a picture of family, could be a picture of a pet that kind of bring us back in when we get distracted. And it makes people feel that that space is their own. If you're going in and constantly having to find space, it can prove to be a challenge. And then, some of us like to sit where we sit. We like
Mhm.
our space by the window. Some of
Yeah.
us like the extra sunlight. Some of us don't like the extra sunlight and prefer darkness for people who may suffer from like migraines or screen fatigue, when your eyes are exhausted. Those what may be perceived as minor details can have a huge impact on how people come into the workplace, especially when we're calling them back into the office when they become so comfortable working in their own space at home.
Yeah, so I think it's good to be aware and be observant and ask questions to your point, Ro, when you do have people. How is this working for you? What do you think about the new space?
Mhm.
What's one thing you really like about it? What's one thing you don't like about it? Because people may not be comfortable just saying, it doesn't work for me, I can't do my job here. But if you make it safe for them to be able to share, you may learn something that's not only helping that person, but could be helping others as well.
But the thing with that is, and I just want to add to your point, if we're going to ask, we have to take action.
Agree. Yes.
It is very important that we
Yeah.
just ask questions for the sake of asking and then do nothing with the information that we receive back. It's imperative that we even take small steps to show that people that we've heard them, we acknowledge that they're experienced and we want to be supportive. If we're just asking people to answer questions and doing nothing about it, it almost feels frivolous.
Great point. And I thought you were going to say something else and I was catching myself. Make sure you ask all people, not just people you think may not be
Yeah.
uh, acclimating to whatever the design change is. Ask all people to get feedback.
And that goes across a ton of different categories too, not
Right.
just the disability conversation. So if you're asking questions, ask everybody. Don't
Yes.
isolate individuals because you perceive them to be one identifying group over another.
Right.
Oh, that was good.
So we have alluded to the fact that, a lot of this is good leadership practice, but can you talk a little bit more about some other things you've learned or you've seen that are good leadership practices in the world of accessibility?
In the accessibility world, it's an ever evolving, ever changing, ongoing learning experience. So let me say that there's no end at this because things change daily. But some of the things that I've seen that have worked really, really well is creating space for people to have focus time. And it is sounds like a very small thing, free of charge, nothing costing, but allowing people to block time to have no meetings. Because meetings, although they can be productive in the moment, they can really disrupt the day if you're working on a
Mhm.
larger task. So having the meeting free focus blocks is well. Choice participation regarding how people are engaging in virtual meetings. I know a lot of times we're asking people to always be on camera, to be present, but for someone who has social anxiety or angst, that can be very overwhelming. So giving, choice-based participation. Do you want to be on camera? Do you want to be off camera? Are you going to engage with your voice or are you going to engage with chat? Making sure there's multiple ways to follow up on conversations is also a key. So if people are not answering questions in real time, there's an opportunity to send correspondence after, and it's not frowned upon or it's not ignored because it wasn't part of the live conversation. Thinking about the budget constraints, I've had some clients that have been very intentional about carving out additional dollars to make sure people have the access that are needed to do the upgrades, to make sure technology and resources are available, and then making sure you invest in training your managers on how to be disability affirming, to look beyond the limitations and see the strengths. It is something that is not necessarily taught or learned behavior, but we can teach it to get people acclimated because it is a different thought process. And just acknowledging that there are going to be bumps in the roads. We're not always going to get it right 100% of the time, but to lean forward with intentionality and kind of own the mistakes and have accountability and then learn from them and and move forward.
Yeah, and that training managers piece that you just mentioned, sometimes managers will look at a behavior and make an assumption about the individual
Mhm.
without thinking through what could be impacting this that caused this behavior. And I'm not saying that that's always the answer, but I think it's really retraining leaders. And the only way to do that is to help them become more aware of how certain things may show up in a workplace that
Mhm.
may require some curiosity and a little bit more conversation to really determine how we may be able to support someone versus just saying someone's not doing their job.
Think we had a question and answer. There's a question that popped up. Do we want to do Q&As now in real time?
Sure, sure.
Oh, the question is, how do you balance engaging with chat with feedback from neurodiverse staff who find the chat distracting and unable to fully follow the meeting? It's a very good question. I think it's giving people the option if they're in a virtual meeting that they can have their chat window open or closed because there's an option for you to have it fully engaged and not. Should be someone's responsibility to monitor that so everyone doesn't have to have the chat window open because if it is a distraction for some people, but it's the best method of communication for others, then we want to have that flexibility to let people know ahead of time you don't have to have the chat window open if the constant pings are going to be a distraction, but we still want to fully engage the people who are only going to have dialogue by way of chat and just identify a person to monitor the chat window to make sure that the engagement is unified all the way around.
It just made me think of an experience we had doing a training session years ago with a higher ed institution. And the feedback we got after the session from some of the attendees was that they felt uncomfortable using chat, because their first language was not English. And they felt, because it was an academic institution, that the way they wrote something might be perceived by others as not well written,
Mm,
and that and the name was attached to the chat. So if I typed something in, they would know that Allison typed this in. And if I, made some sort of grammatical error, they felt a certain kind of way about that. So we had to address it for the future training. And I don't exactly remember what we did, but I know we did set some kind of rules of engagement on the front end, just saying, look, chat's a free space. Please don't worry about typos. Please don't worry about anything like that for those of you who wish to engage that way. But it's interesting. We hadn't thought about it before that session.
mhm.
So, like you mentioned, we're always learning about this.
The disability affirming leadership, and this just kind of goes back to the mindset shift. This is us thinking beyond what we think is the default way that people should work. And I put default in air quotes. It's offering multiple paths for performance outcomes. If someone can get the outcome and the deliverable done, does it matter how they do it? Does it have to be this rigid way that you are accustomed to getting work done? Can we reimagine what that looks like? Of course, it should not be in any way that's going to, exclude or impact folks negatively in the workspace. But do we have to be as rigid in what we expect performance to look like in the core working hours? Like, does somebody have to be tied to their desk from 9 a.m. to 5 p.m.? Is that really necessary? If someone is not engaging in a meeting, finding out what participation methods work for them. Some people just don't like talking in public. They just don't.
Mhm.
And it's okay, but they have great ideas. They are probably some of the best people to help you with procedures and protocol and process, because they're thinking it all the way through from start to finish, but they don't want to talk in front of everybody. That's okay too. There's strengths that come. This one was my favorite. They seem distracted. They seem to always be being pulled in different directions. Listen, sensory overload is a real thing. It happens. And then I find even when we come into the office, we have a in-office day as a hybrid team. I've learned that on in-office days, I don't bank on getting a lot of project work done, because
Same.
this is the one time probably a month that we get to see each other and everybody wants to ask the questions that you would normally like pop into someone's office to ask, that because we don't only get to see each other in person like once a month. It's a lot of conversation, it's a lot of engagement, it's a lot of starting and stopping work. But for someone who can, have sensory overload, it's just like, woo, okay. I know I need to go take 30 minutes in a private space to regroup and refocus so I can come out and still be fully engaged. Creating spaces like that. So if people need to step away from an open office design to have quiet space is huge. But if you're
Yeah.
not thinking about the person who is sensory overload sometimes, you're not worried about office space being off in quiet or dark rooms for people who have migraine issues or visual stimuli, things like that. But when we think about incorporating all of those voices, we can truly create universal design that's beneficial for everybody. It really does work that way. Sorry, I went off on a tangent there.
No, no, no. That's great. So we said in the beginning that we wanted you to enter this conversation with the idea that what's one thing that you can do or take away from this session to implement in your workplace. So can you walk us through this, Ro?
Yeah, so it's going beyond the compliance. Compliance will keep you legal. It'll keep you out of fines and punitive damage and things like that. But when you think about redesigning, think about some of the conversations that you may need to have. What are some of the voices that you have missed Or even going back to look at some of the accommodation requests that you've received, is there a recurring theme? Are there ways to kind of figure out, is this something that is a systematic design or is this an isolated individual incident? Making sure it's engaging, I think is the word I'm looking for right now, but making sure that we take the time to figure out how we can reduce the frictions. How can we become less reactive? And get in front of some of these situations by the way we design our policies, our procedures, our office spaces, the way individuals, our leadership development program and trainings. How are we incorporating this to equip leaders to be more aware and to mitigate the bias that comes with ableism? Because it is a real thing and it's something that we don't frequently talk about because it's the default. And if we can kind of consider, and as you're listening to us talk, there are probably scenarios that are running through your head, and you're thinking, well, maybe we should reimagine that, or maybe this is worth a conversation. So I would encourage you to put into practice something that you can redesign over the next 30 days. My favorite is if you're not already, lean into the agenda sending before a meeting. It's a game changer. It
Mhm.
literally, I've gotten feedback from clients that when they know now, when they're coming into conversations, what the objectives are, what they're looking to kind of solve for, so people know how to come prepared, their meetings have been much more productive. They're less tense. There's less friction because people are now not trying to argue points to be heard but understanding there are other ways to get feedback so they don't feel like they have to be the loudest voice in the room and make the fastest recommendation to be considered because now leadership is listening to all of the multiple methods of communication and offering time and reflection for people who process differently. Absolute game changer. One of my favorite uh,
Mhm.
implementations that I was part of to institute for a client.
You made me think too, something that I think would be helpful too, for those of you that do offer training for supervisors and managers. Think about how you can integrate concepts of this in your existing training. So when you're talking about performance management training, how can you build in something around recognizing how you can mitigate excess, or how you can make the performance process more accessible for people, right? You might have your set process that you do, and it's managed through your HRIS system, and it's shot out, and people respond, and this and that. What can you do? Is that uncomfortable for, is that making it inaccessible for certain people? Or could there be a better design for that to make it a better process? The training around that, the training around communication, the training around interviewing, how we interview, and is does that work for all people? Is that accessible? I know, Ro, you shared a great example about how an organization had shifted their interviewing process to make it more inclusive by giving options.
Mhm.
So people could be on camera, off camera, people could talk live or not do a video chat. They could have an in-person meeting or a Zoom meeting. I mean, again, this is assuming that that's possible within your organization structure. But think about your entire employee experience and where might there be opportunities for you to embed that training into what's already existing for your managers so that it doesn't, training around how you think about this doesn't sit outside of being a leader and good leadership skills. It's actually embedded into being a good leader.
Yes, it should be part of all of the conversations.
Mhm.
And to your point about the interviewing, that has been, and I get a lot of questions right now in this world that we live in with AI. If we don't see people on camera, how do we know they're real people? Am I talking with a real person? Is this a chat bot? There will be stages in the interview process where you will fully be able to engage with someone to see if they're real, most definitely. Um, but I think giving people that safety up front to know that they don't have to be performative, because interviewing can be performative. We all know how to say the exact thing at the right time. We rehearse it. We do mock interviews with family members so that we show up and present in a way. But do we want the performative version of an employee or the authentic version?
Mhm.
You want to get to know the person you're actually going to work with, or the person that does really well on the interview. So if we
Mhm.
can make the interview more inclusive to support individuals who may interview differently, who may require having some of the interview questions ahead of time to be able to reflect, to give thorough answers because they're not really good at answering on the spot. That's being inclusive. That's universal design. That's updating your interview practices to be inclusive and also to be accessible for everybody.
Great, great. So that said, Ro, if you want to just check, could you check please to see if there are any additional questions? We invite you to ask any specific questions that you may have.
Yes.
Again, if we're not able to address those questions, or if it's something you want to ask but you'd prefer to ask us directly, you can certainly reach out to us separately, and we'd be happy to
We
talk
do
with
have
you.
an anonymous question. The question is, if you have a manager who is unwilling to adjust to the needs or slash accommodations of their coworkers, for an example, requiring their subordinates to be online from 9 to 5, how do you recommend leadership approach the issue? We want to create an equitable environment for all staff while not undercutting or overruling managerial requirements. Very great question. I'll take a first response to this, and then of course, Allison, always welcome your insight and thought partnership. I think if there is a manager who is unwilling to adjust to the needs and accommodations of their coworkers, first off, we need to understand why. Lead in with curiosity. What is the constraint? What is the concern this person has? Because typically, when someone is unwilling to adjust, it's because they feel it's going to impact them in some kind of way. It's usually because they feel like their work will be impacted. They may be asked to do more. There may be delays in getting things done, or they think that this person not working the same schedule as them is going to negatively impact the outcomes that they have. So, first off, I always encourage to lean in with curiosity to find out why this person has a concern. If there's an opportunity here to get clarity on what the concern is and set expectations for this manager, that may resolve the issue. To understand that if someone else is delayed, that there's no punitive damage for that person. However, I am a firm believer of establishing core working hours within an organization.
Mhm.
There should be at least 5 hours a day where everyone in the organization is accessible. And this is usually over time zones and things like that. But it can be adjusted based on the needs of your team. So that gives people that focus time to work on things as an individual, be accessible for meetings and engagement and thought partnerships with others, collaborative work. But those are kind of in the middle of the day. And then that way, if there's still a challenge with how this person is engaging, then it might be not be the accommodation needs. It could be a communication issue. It could be a personality conflict. So getting to the root cause of what the issue is will help mitigate why this person seems to be unwilling to adjust.
I agree with everything you said, and I would add one other tidbit for food for thought. If you do that and you discover perhaps that it's a trust issue, which it may be. I just don't, some people just don't trust that somebody's not working if they're not on, I don't know. But if there's an opportunity to perhaps encourage that leader to pilot a I don't know, maybe 2 days a week where there is a little bit more flexibility there. A
Mhm.
pilot can be a safer way to try something for some people. So maybe we say, okay, I'm making this up, you know, Mondays and Fridays, we're going to pilot, or Tuesdays and Thursdays, we're going to pilot this core hours. And the core hours are, to Rose's point, let's say 11 to 4 or 10 to 4, something like that. And see how that goes and set a time frame on it. We're going to try that for 6 weeks and really gather data and see how this leader feels. That might give that person the trust that that person needs to say, okay, we can try, we can extend this pilot, we can expand this pilot,
Mhm.
and gradually reduce any concerns that that person may have. Again, there are a lot of unknowns there. So, but I think Rose's first point about leading in with curiosity is the best way to start, because you have to understand why that person feels the way that they do and why they've put that into place.
Yeah.
Great question.
I think that was the only one that I saw in the Q&A.
Okay,
If anyone else has any additional questions, please feel free to put them in the Q&A section or the chat.
Mhm.
We're monitoring both.
Great. And before we say goodbye to all of you, we do want to share that we have an upcoming Ro again is going to be leading a fantastic session on driving results through effective time use. And this is something she has been curating for the last couple of years and is constantly tweaking this presentation. And I think you're going to find it really helpful. We've had a lot of requests for this topic, so she's going to work her magic and share that with us. So there is a QR code there for you to register if you're interested. We would love to see you at that session. And as always, we want to thank you for spending part of your afternoon with us. We hope that you can walk away with some little golden nugget of information that may be helpful to you or somebody on your team. I'll remind you again, if you would like to have a complimentary consult, please reach out to us. We're happy to arrange for that. And on behalf of all of us at Exude Human Capital, thank you, Ro. And thank you, all of you. We hope to see you again on one of our webinars. Have a
Have a
great
great
day.
day, everybody.